then just turning to the planning benefits, Romola, what sort of planning advantages could there be within a free port that would not be available elsewhere, and how significant are these?
Well, I think the first thing is to think about the port core area itself, and the planning authorities, the local planning authorities already have the powers to put into place a thing called a local development order. Now that would effectively give a blanket consent for specific kinds of development within a specific area. Now it would be subject to limitations, of course, but doing that, first of all, from the point of view of the port, it creates a platform on which a coherent development of the port site itself can actually go forward. So rather than the current system with individual planning consents where you get a much more piecemeal approach, it would enable a more coherent and a more planned port facility development to go forward. It also has the possibility of being able to spread the costs of decontamination of land in particular, which for a lot of these port facilities is likely to be an issue. A lot of the land in those areas is likely to be brownfield. For the developer, it would significantly reduce the risk and increase the certainty and the speed of actually getting planning consent, because once the order is in place, you wouldn't need to get individual planning consents for every single development. So that's one possibility, and that's likely to be a model which will be brought forward. Where the developments are more complex and related to national infrastructure, there is an equivalent system for the Secretary of State to put in place a development consent order, which is a very similar kind of thing, but is slightly bigger. And that might be more useful where you're integrating different parts of the infrastructure, but also where a port facility might span more than one local authority, because a local authority can only put in place an LDO for its own land. So both those mechanisms are currently in place, but they would take time to actually build out. What we do have is the extension of permitted development rights. Now that applies to all existing buildings and uses and allows certain kinds of developments such as extensions or changes of use subject to limits, which can actually happen now. And those were extended in relation to ports in April of this year. So it just widens the scope of the kind of buildings that can be developed under permitted development rights and who can actually bring forward that development. So they're now on a port with rail ports and airports. There are some proposals which are going forward. Of course, we're all aware of the white paper and the idea of land zoning, but that's quite a long way in the future and is currently sort of tripped over itself and ground to a halt. But what we do currently have is land allocations for certain uses by local planning authorities. So where they've allocated land for business use, for development, for manufacturing, for other kinds of facilities, that sort of adds weight to the in favour of development of the kind which would be suitable for both the free ports and in the hinterland, the manufacturing, storage, warehouse, distribution, and all the other activities which are linked to the free port itself, but those which spread the benefits further inland. Where the land allocations aren't in favour of those kind of developments, the council can actually make decisions that override those less favourable allocations if there is good reason to do so. And where there's a very strong political will for manufacturing development, for free port related development, you may well find that some of those land allocations could be swayed in favour of development which relates to the port and the hinterland. And I think the final proposal, which is bandied around in the prospectus, although how they will actually do it is not entirely clear, is the integration of both terrestrial and marine planning regimes. Because at the moment, what goes on in the water in the marine side is dealt with under a different regime to that which goes on land. And obviously with free ports, you'll have a certain amount of development that will stretch out into the sea. And so an integration of those two regimes would actually be quite helpful, again, going towards a less risky and more coherent port development. you.